The sun is just getting up, so we probably won't have too many live visitors from the US to hear Frank, but they will see when we have the steamed version ready. Today, we have several sessions on new strategies, on DMO strategies. We will also have a bit about how to measure well-beings in destinations. I'm very happy to welcome our first speaker, Frank Cuypers. The noun sounds Dutch, Flemish, but he's actually originally from Canada. Frank is a very renowned speaker. He's been speaking on 5 continents. Destination, on city management, city marketing are his main areas of interest. He's been working with a long list of clients. It's so long that I won't go through the whole list today. Just to mention a few: wonderful Copenhagen, Munich, Vancouver. Frank is associated with Destination Think, but he's been working with the World Bank as well. Frank, I'm very excited and I'm very happy to welcome you. Yours is the scene.
Yeah, thank you, Jan. Yeah, very welcome everybody on my ceiling here in Antwerpen in Belgium. Yeah, it's the ceiling because my wife is working from the sleeping room. My daughter took my office because she has to write a thesis, and my son has the ground floor. So that's how life looks now during COVID. We all know that. So let's dive into it. Please, production, can you start the presentation? And boom, the magic happens. So if you think this title is slightly provocative, you might be wrong. It's genuine from my side and it's heartfelt. And moreover, I always dreamt to do James Bond titles for presentations like Live or Let Die or You'd Only Live Twice, because in the end, it seems to contain the promise that in the end, after many adventures and suffering, the good always conquers the evil. So adapt or die is not only a command, it can also be seen as an expression of hope. And it's, of course, the adaptation or the death of organizations, not of human beings. We're speaking here, let that be clear. We're living in certain times that make me work from my ceiling. And that expression in certain times remind me about my time in China, where people wish each other interesting times, and we're living interesting times for sure. Okay, so this is a chart I borrowed from my Canadian friends from Destinations International, another consultant. And indeed, in North America, we speak of layoffs of 50%, 70% immediately 1 month after the crisis started. These are difficult times and we're all tested, but someone who has never been put to the test will never know his own strength. This was the curve of Ireland, and this is the kind of crack we only saw before, I think, economically in 2008. But I never saw it so brutally, so abruptly, and certainly not overnight in the tourism space. And as the last warming up, I give you this photo. Some of you will be familiar with this. This is Lopburi. This is the northeast of Bangkok, where large crowds of monkeys came down the street. We speak about hundreds of monkeys. They were marauding. They were aggressively plundering the shops because they were frustrated that they were not fed by tourists anymore. That really brought out the ape in them. So what about the travel industry? What about the DMOs in particular? Are we going to behave like monkeys and start becoming grumpy and frustrated that the tourists stay away? Or are we going to do something about it, and are we going to really act? So managing and leading your industry in uncertain times, that's what we're going to talk about. And I want to start with this book. As we are speaking now, some of you might have noticed that this book, it's a classic from 1947. I'm sure most of you were not born then. That book is now topping the charts in Europe, in the United States. Why? Because it's about a lockdown. It's by a Nobel Prize winner, Albert Camus, and it's written about a city, Oran, that goes completely in lockdown because of the plague. And rather than a novel, it's a report of how people react during that crisis. And there you see actually, and it should be a manual for management people, all kind of attitudes that people use to respond to a crisis. From Father Peneleu, who is the typical moralistic guy who always said, pointing his finger to God, "I always told you so." And there are numerous articles and blogs of gurus, academics who said, "Yeah, I told you so for a long time." They seem even to be happy they're right. Then you had Kotar. That's a guy who wants to make money out of it, right? He's opportunistic. That's something I see as well. You see a lot of blog articles like "Never waste a good crisis." Personally, I think that is inappropriate. The language of winners and losers is very unsuitable and very unbecoming in a time that there is no income for people, that there are so many job losses. You're with Ramon. He's a journalist, but he never writes. He has no deadline and he's totally in love. And the only thing he gives a damn about is getting out because he wants to see his girlfriend. And he lives in denial. We saw that after the crisis, a lot of irresponsible leaders, I'm not going to name them, you know them, who said everything is going to be back to normal by Easter. And then it was end of May and end of June, and maybe now it's the end of the summer. Now you have Theroux, very likely guy, friendly character, full of empathy, one that works for a DMO probably, but he's not doing anything. He's passive. And I think the right way is to behave as a leader is this one. It's Dr. Rieu. It's the main character, the one actually that is also having the sympathy of the author, Albert Camus. And he's a doctor. And I don't think that's a coincidence. He fixes things. He wants to get things done. And he's not moralist at all. Yet he says the plague that are we, meaning I have to deal with it and I'm gonna fight to it. And that is the right leadership role that I would like to see. If you have plans, strategies of nations, DMO states in this time, you always see the 3 degrees, right? People have different names. We call them the mitigation phase, the restart phase, and the reimagine phase. I think most of the clients I know for now, they're just going back, start bouncing back. They just are past the tipping point, starting to the restart phase. So you need to mitigate your impact, restart your industry, and reimagine tourism. And today I really want to focus on number 3. But I want to give you some insights what you can do in 1 and 2 and what we have done. Probably you're familiar with this one. This is the McKinsey uncertainty framework. So there are 4 phases according to McKinsey. And the first one, the clear enough future, that's the one you know. You understand all the parameters, they're very predictable. And that's how typically operate a DMO. You know your product, you know your market, you know your seasonal patterns, you know the events that are coming, you know what air access you have, you know your visa restrictions. So you have a solid understanding and you brief your agencies about promotional campaigns and when and where to set them up. You're running programs with your industry. So you have a pretty good insight in what outcome you will have. This is your comfort zone. Level 2, these are all the alternative futures. Um, so here you need to deal with other possibilities, but only a few, like there are some variables. And you're still quite familiar with it because that's when you try something new markets, new niches, new kind of programs. So there are a few options and there's a slightly higher level of uncertainty. It's a controlled risk. Level 3 is when there is a range of possible future, where it's not just 2 or 3, but maybe a dozen or more scenarios, or what could happen um, in each of these scenarios. And it's a lot harder to plan. And the last one is when you have absolutely don't have a clue where you are and what is going to happen next. Now, let's say 6 weeks ago, we certainly were all in stage 4, and now probably we are in stage 3. What we see, though, from our clients is that most DMOs still operate at a level 1. for the mere reason that they are confident with doing that, they trust that, that's what they're used to. And that's what you do, the day-to-day carrying out of one single plan. And it's not enough to just adjust that a bit or stretch it out or not to adapt it to the situation that you are in now. So, which requires various scenarios for different kinds of futures. You need actually to plan for this. Um, how many times do you need to do that? Even with smaller clients, we do that weekly adaptation of your plans. How do you do that? How do you start these plans? You need to inform yourself, of course. A lot of you are like me. I've been watching 20, 30 webinars over the last months to see what kind of data they're collecting and also compare that with my work, which is one of academic research. And there is a lot of out there. I only took one. This is a slide from a webinar from Tourism Switzerland, and they see literally in times of uncertainty that data matter more than ever. And I could not say it better or agree more. So we have created this framework for the type of data you need to collect, but also research, looking at some expert insights, expert analysis. And we think there are three core buckets here. The first one is that you have to consider what your DMO factors are. It really matters if you're a small community in the USA or where you are a city in Europe or a province in Canada, state in Australia, or if you are a national tourism organization with much more resources. Then, of course, it matters if you represent a place in the USA with huge geography and many people, or whether you are a small country in Europe like Slovakia, Slovenia, or Slavonia in Croatia, that act differently as a DMO than these huge big guys in the US. But your funding matters as well. Some DMOs are still financially stable in this time as they get grants from the governments. Others are totally dependable on what I would call a sort of bed tax, a revenue stream that completely dried up. Then there are the impacts. You really need to measure what the impacts are going to be. And this is really, really important. First of all, for your tourism industry, what kind of cancellations do you see? Are new bookings already on the rise? That's what we're seeing now. A bit cautious, neighboring countries, your own place. We saw a lot of creativity during the previous months, like hotels filling their rooms with healthcare workers, homeless, and generating some revenue of doing that task for the government. What is the situation here when it comes to job loss? What is happening to your access? What about if you are totally dependent of air access? It's different when you are an island in the Caribbean than when you are France, for instance. So then we look at markets. What is the situation in your market? What is the health situation? What is the impact on their economy? Because that will impact their ability to travel. And what is the impact culturally? And you can understand that even as emotionally, right? Okay, the borders are open again, but I don't see massive movements yet. People will start acting very cautiously. So is there anything in the society that might shift or change? Will this market lose its relevance for us? Do we need to adapt our positioning to that market, our messaging? And then lastly, the organizational impact. Tough decisions have been made. Staff is related to that. So what are the roles that we need right now? Is promotion your focus with the budget left, or is it better to keep some staff to collect all these data? And those who are familiar with my philosophy and the one of my team, Destination, think know already our answer. We believe that the core of destination market does not require huge advertising budget, and we don't have large budgets anymore. So it's really the appropriate time to rethink and be creative with what you have. Okay. So I'm not gonna say too much about this, but the mitigation phase, this is the most uncertain one. This is the one where the social distancing is still happening. Maybe you still have no restaurants, but delivery or take out. This is also the most fluid situation where you need to be the most agile and where you need to think out of the box. So this is not your typical messaging about your brand. So you start with collecting data, you create hypotheses, and in this phase, it's really like say 10 or 15. Then you select with client based on data the three most likely ones, and you build a plan for every of them. How often do you need to update them? I said it already. Doesn't care whether you're small or big. You need to do that weekly, weekly update or adjustment. Okay. And then there is a whole bunch of questions you need to ask when you're going to create that plan. I'm not going to read them through you, but just point that if we speak about markets, there is a caveat. It does not mean geography for us. What comes first is the passion of the people, but also messaging can be affected, right? You need in that phase a totally different tone of voice. You need to show other stuff visually and so on. Then there is the restart phase, and this is the phase where most of you will be. Um, that's what people focus on now. It's a parallel process. You start from the same set of data, but this time you're going to build long-term impact models. And most clients I worked with last time in New Zealand, Canada, United States, Europe, we typically have three long-term restart plans. Let's say, for instance, I improvise one for late summer, one for or fall, one to restart in winter, or one to restart in spring. And again, other questions should be raised here. This PowerPoint will be made available so you can read them at ease. And then it's also in the restart phase, the proper moment to fight amnesia, because there's been a lot of anticipation for this phase. People couldn't wait because it means we can go back to action and get back to helping in the ways that we know we're good in. But it's critical that we fight a human desire to move on immediately. While it is still fresh in your mind, my advice would be, and even if you don't fully flesh it out, call a team meeting, a stakeholder meeting to brain dump everything you've learned about this situation. But there is a risk that there will be a second wave, an economic crisis. All these things are somewhere blinking in the future. And this is something you need to do with the ultimate goal of being a key organizational priority uh, to move forward. And then campaigns. That's what we all know, right? Campaigns, everybody feels at ease with that world. Well, this is quite new. We had MERS, we had SARS, but this is the first really global blow. The world is going through the same thing at the same time. So we need a new move. And I noted here, Zach, while everyone zigs, maybe we need a zog, like a third move. But it's important. Think ahead how we might move through those scenarios. And I want to expand a little bit on this. I think this is the time to become symbolic. These are not only times to become symbolic, but to be symbolic. What does symbolic means? It means in marketing that you communicate by expressing what you are, your DNA, through your community. Now, dear people, this is a bit my biggest fear. As I'm speaking now, a number of promotion campaigns are in the process of being feverishly developed on campaign drawing boards. And I can already dream the slogans. Ready to jumpstart business. We are open, proud, more than ever proud, pride. Um, so what you gonna promise? The same for everybody. There is nothing wrong by tapping into the local pride. That's great, but there's a huge risk here that you go into the old habit of over promising. And as a consequence, you will under deliver because COVID is not a way ready. There's a lot of restrictions. So stay who you are. You are a composition of a lot of things, your people, your history, your economy, the situation. Or like Dr. Seuss once said, how was it? You are youer than you, and that is truer than true. Let me just explain it by two strong examples. 2016, big crisis, the Greek island of Lesbos. And they were in the front line of another global crisis, the one of displaced people. And they have even have been called by some press in Europe, the ground zero for Europe's refugee crisis. So the island provided shelter for thousands of people who came across the sea, and the residents did their human duty. And as a result, the world is very cruel. Tourism dropped with 90%. That was their reward. And most people were about to lose their job, and they were then there was suddenly a very simple idea of a visiting volunteer who did not only provide humanitarian assistance, but she also recognized the need to sustain tourism because she wanted to support the residents, right? And she started to share very positive stories, and she invented the hashtag Beautiful Lesbos. It was first embraced by the locals and later picked on by all people over Europe. Remember that very well. I was one of them. So a lot of people who had visited the island sympathized with him. And it's probably, as far as I know, one of the strongest grassroots actions in tourism ever. The second is one of my favorite places, Ireland. And Ireland went through many economic crises, you know that. So when the economy is up, they top the charts. When global economy goes down, it's like a roller coaster. They really go down. So at a certain moment, they asked themselves, what can we do about our reputation? And they came up with that value proposition, DNA. They said, we are an island of artists. And I'm not going to mention the Sinead O'Connors, the U2, the Nobel Prize winners, literature, the Eurovision Song Contest winners, and what have you. We speak about the creativity of the people, the pubs where people are singing together, the taxi driver or natural born storyteller. So what did they do with it? Ads on BBC, on CNN, huge billboards on every main airport? No, they changed one piece of fiscal policy. And if you could prove you are an artist and you met some of these criteria, of course, you had to pay hardly any taxes. That made Ireland go viral during these days on BBC, on CNN. And the cost of the campaign was almost nothing, zero. So there was a symbolic action expressing in a policy measure what Irish people stand for. And as an industry, you need to come up with these symbolic ideas. Still in the restart, this is a moment to create new partnerships, right? Um, so the whole COVID crisis and what happens after will be a small step for a DMO, but it can become a giant leap for the industry because it will be for the DMO a step back. Meaning, instead of staying the promotional spokesman or woman of your destination, you're going to become the ghostwriter of your destination, the scenario planner, the one who enables, the one who mediates, the one who fills gaps in the communication, the one who leads by example. And it's really time in this stage to start managing your destination. And the core of all that is what you have been doing during the crisis. You showed sympathy and you were communicating about your people. So if we speak about a new landscape, I always made jokes in the past about it. And I said the DMO world is a very layered landscape. I call that the bad lasagna. Because what you have local, regional, provincial, national, federal, I should not forget the state level, and every layer is having a sort of different messaging, and it's not working together, it's not tasting together. So another thing you can do on top of smoothing this out is create a restart committee. Look at Australia. They started immediately during the crisis, a national think tank for tourism. You can do it on a very local level. You can broaden your network. What about the transport sector, education, the cultural world, heritage, agriculture, health sector? Broaden the definition of tourism. And the last one is about partnering with digital investment platforms. You're all listening from home now, and there certainly is a role for a DMO in bridging between digital investment platforms and tourism entrepreneurs and even co-invest in that like we see in some places. Then this is the one I wanted to speak with you about. Reimagine tourism. Reimagine is not a song by John Lennon, and for sure you won't be the only one who is a dreamer. So you will be with many, and you will have to be with many to do it with many. So adapt or die as a DMO, the core of our presentation. And this is probably the most important slide I show today. So 3 years ago, already 3 years ago, we co-created this chart. So it's not a destination thing. Probably it's something we did with 100 CEOs and VPs from destinations all over the planet, 5 continents. We did it in New York. And this was the industry coming up with as their biggest challenge, a lack of diversification and the threat of a loss of relevance. How can you be relevant? And look about the different circles of this chart and think about the time we're living in now. Think about the changing industry landscape. The industry landscape will be disrupted more than ever. Think about all the national carriers at this moment. Lufthansa, Swiss Air, Austria Airlines, and Brussels Airlines are talking with their governments to be saved with money from the taxpayers. So will be a blank check, or will governments ask for a more sustainable approach in the future? What about OTAs? Will have more people found a way to them on the internet? Will people become more selective than before? So to the right, you have the risk of undiversified revenue streams. Funny, I got an email of a Danish DMO to contact them with Americans, and New Zealanders want to know how the grant system in Europe works. They're studying that now. So everybody in the industry knows this is your true vulnerability. Try to diversify these streams as much as you can. Okay. So the first signs of something new. I selected 2 good articles I found, and one here, the credit is to Freedom Lab. And as we all know, the crisis lays bare the existing problems. And some of these can become a target for society in post-corona times. Now, these problems can become visible, like spread of the virus related to poor accessibility of healthcare in some countries, but that's not your core business. But also, um, current measures against further spreading of the virus that has shown us what the world could look like. What I'm talking about is clean air in Chinese cities, crystal clear water in Venice. People will talk to you about us. They will address to you that. So this chart make you think, where are we going to be? What kind of world will I be serving as a DMO? Will there be a wave of collectivism, or will we quickly go back to individual again? Will we globalize or will we deglobalize? Is it more about prevention or is it more about preparation? And then I found this hidden gem. It's a podcast of Quo Agency. I don't really know them, but I really like it. And it's about the future of travel. And in the first episode of Quo's series, they speak with Citizen M, you know the chain, CEO Michael Levy, about how much the travel industry is likely to change as a function of COVID-19. And he ponders the ramification of social distancing for a brand like Citizen M. And he says literally, there is no way we will go back to the situation before. These last words, the new normal. I don't like the word recovery. It seems to suggest covering up. A new normal asks for a new way of thinking. Part of that is redevelopment, right? So redevelopment will be based on communities in 2 ways. First, your internal community, your residents. And I have good news. It exists already for a long time, co-creating with your community. It's something we do in urban planning, which is my original field of interest. And Jane Jacobs was the first to do that. So placemaking is something that pops in, especially in cities, in tourism plans more and more. People think immediately about this. Placemaking is designing the physical space by permission of your locals. But it also can be digital placemaking. I was so impressed that Michael Bloomberg, who was then mayor of New York, yelled years ago, And he said, I quote, "How is it possible that a company of the West Coast, not to name Google, decides how people in the major city of the East Coast have to move in that public space?" Because according to the algorithm of Google Maps, you always had to turn right, which caused congestion and traffic jams. And that's why Waze probably was invented and later was bought by them. So, digitally, physically, a community will always fight back. This brings us back to what you do, place marketing. That is actually what tourism marketing is a part of. And smart DMOs wisely start from co creating with their community, even their strategies. That's why we came up years ago, and it's our best selling product, is the DNA. This is about ownership. Who owns the name of a place, right? And this is just a piece of research. This is not the final product. This is the start of a conversation you have with a destination about what are we. And everybody thinks they're unique because they have a landmark or a mountain or they're by the sea. They're not. There are a lot of places that can claim that, but it's the combination that makes you unique. And that will impact your development and your promotion. But secondly, there is another community. It's one of your visitors. And I just want to refer to research we have in the French speaking world. So I'm bilingual, I speak Flemish and French. And it's about the pace in which places can bounce back. Some places do that quicker than others. One of the explanation is that those places with a strong appeal in passionate communities will be helped by these communities. We learned that the hard way in Brussels 2 days after the bomb attack at the airport. There was a huge vibe and wave online of the people that love comic books, and they were expressing sympathy and what can we do and can we do tangible stuff. So they are doing your crisis communication. The same with Paris, of course, very strong, known in the niche of art lovers. So these two destinations bounced back in 6 months, which is amazing. It has not only to do with short memories of tourism, it has certainly to do with the passion of the people have for these places. So that impacts your segmentation. That's the key disruption of the last 5 years. More and more DMOs have understood this and invest in passionate communities and in research about passionate communities, not only because people with a real passion for what you have to offer stay longer and spend more, but it makes you more resilient, less vulnerable. I'm going to skip this one. So you need, of course, if you're serious about this, if experiences come first, if the passion of the people come first, you need to have other metrics. And we created the TSI, the Tourism Sentiment Index, which is measuring actually all the touch points of your customer journey. What is the sentiment of people that are visiting your place? And then you can compare that with the place sentiment. And then you can say how tourism contributes to that overall place sentiment, residents plus visitors. And last not the least, you can compare to a competitive set. So that's a cheap tool I think it's 2 years ago, um, we created. It's a 5,000 thing or something like that. I don't want to sell this or something like that, but it's there are other stuff available as well. But it's something that DMOs places need to do for sure. Having a very thorough insight about the sentiment of the people that live there, come to study there, visit you, and what they say about what you have to offer. And then we need to go to the new normal. This crisis has been predicted by many people. I just pick one, economist Ian Goldin. You all know what a butterfly effect is. He speaks about the butterfly defect. It's not in. So what he's actually saying is there is a systemic risk, and risk issues become endemic everywhere. We see that in supply chains, infrastructure, ecology, climate change, economics, politics, and certainly during pandemics. So what can you do as a DMO? You can do a lot. you need to add elements of circular economy to your tourism industry. That's what they did in New Zealand. I worked in Whakatane and they set up a project funded by tourism. They selected strictly and exclusively people that have a big heart for these rare birds. And they made them participate in walks with very experienced guides. They had a zoning plan in place. You can walk here as a tourist, but not there. There are breeding areas. There is signage development about the kiwi birds. There was a program even to train dogs. And finally, they rebranded Symbolic Capital themselves as the Kiwi Capital. How was that funded? All by money coming from meaningful tourism. Österreich, Austria, the eco-region, kind of. There's a community that chooses for circular economy. So they're in that biochar thing, enriched soil. And to sustain that and fund that, they allow and they welcome a certain kind of tourism, people that have the same passion for Mother Nature. And last but not least, during the crisis, I was talking to the CEO of Bay of Plenty, and she said, "Oh, my crisis plan is this one. This is this strategy, and it's about reduction of CO2 emission. It's about a plastic ban. It's about co-creating with the indigenous people, the Maoris. It's about locally produced souvenirs and so on." So it's very brave of her because it's an outstanding example of long-term visions. It's like indigenous people, like you have the Indians in Canada, the Maori, and so on. They always plan for the 7 next generations. Okay, you have been staring for months on your computer, cell phone, television to this one, the famous, notorious COVID-19 chart. So I should suggest that we keep using that chart and we replace it by a dotted line of the virus by the Earth's capacity. And I think that would be awesome. Then you would be truly leading your industry. And that is what very famous consultant, the man who advised Angela Merkel, for instance, um, says for a long time, we need to go for the reimagination of tourism from a win-win situation to a win-win-win. Win-win is easy. That's business. You create a deal. Someone has something to offer, a hotel, a place. Someone is looking for that. Wow, 2 partners are satisfied. But you have been sending the invoice for a decades to a third party, right? Local residents, indigenous communities, nature, um, damage to heritage, and so on and so on. And that is the core problem of tourism in these days. It's economic leakage. So in reality, I see the opposite, and tourism is the industry with the biggest economic leakage. So in the most simple way explained, money is not flowing back in the community, but ends somewhere in the pockets of multinationals that are far away from the place where you live. Like Jan said in the beginning, I work also as a strategist for a project of the World Bank in Malawi. And believe it or not, when I arrived there, the first thing, and Malawi is one of the 5 poorest countries in the planet, you need to know that. You know what they wanted? They wanted to attract 5-star hotels. Who is going to come? Rich people. Will they mingle with the local population? I don't think so. So that's what I want to change. You need to attract people that want to experience local life, have a genuine interest in you, respect nature, people that come from experiences as rock climbing, bird watching, rafting, people that for sure leave money to the local population. And that brings us to the heart of economy. I'm just gonna pick one, Kate Raworth's donut model. And she still acknowledges growth can be good. Growth is necessary as it can bring value to a community, think Malawi, but it should be limited, right? So you have a foundational growth and you have a ceiling of your growth. No kidding, Amsterdam is adapting this model. And it's not a coincidence that it is Amsterdam. It's not a nice to have there, it's a must have, right? And I'm very curious how they're going to do it, because what we always do is launch things with a bang, and Dutch are very good in selling. But I really cross fingers that they realize this and they will achieve this because it would be great. It would be a blessing for Amsterdam. So I'm at the end of my presentation. I think adaptation means resilience towards a new normal. And with my team, I'm puzzled by this. We are looking for a concept or an equation or a formula that drives the future of tourism and that can help you to solidify your direction for the next decade. So at a strategic level, we must be able as an industry to break it down into components that can drive development and measurement. And on the other hand, it should shift thinkers and the emotions from big numbers towards measuring what really matters, right? So we came up with something like the ratio between your value and your impact will finally decide how you prosper. So this is not the formula, but this is like we're thinking in a direction like this. Real value, not only financial, but also symbolic capital, intellectual capital, social capital, is your profit. So not the leakage money, but the real one that flows back to the community, minus your cost, which can be external cost, traditional, your staff, your infrastructure, and the invisible cost. The government who has to clean beaches because of that's tax money, right? And you need to divide that by your reputation qualifier. If everything you do is great, but it still adds negative reputation, there is less value for you. But if it still adds positive reputation, that will be a boost for your place. My summary is adapt or die. First, fight, don't deny, but take responsibility. That's that leadership role I wanted to touch in the beginning slightly. Be creative in adaptation. So we've shown you the 3 phases. Community at heart. This is about balancing quality of life for both your visitors and your residents. And 2, the damage done. This is the restorative tourism, which is really on the rise. Confront realities of leakage. Don't beat around the bush, but tell people what this is all about. And last but not least is about segmentation. Attract aligned visitors. I'm sure there's no time for questions now. We have a Facebook group where you can post, but there's also my email on the BUZZ platform. You can reach out to BUZZ. So let's stay in this together, people. Thank you for listening. And I would say back to production. All right.
Okay, thank you, Frank. One of your colleagues said when we spoke about this, Frank is actually our best speaker, and right, he was. Great show, and I wish we had another hour, particularly when you got into the nitty-gritty stuff, the how to do things. I found that highly interesting. Thank you, much appreciated. To the audience, Frank is busy at the university today, I think, but you will be to reach on our Expo as well. And as you said, your contact details are available on the platform. Thank you so much, Frank.
Thank you.